I'm Maya Keyzers. I'm from the Recycling Market Development Center, and I'm going to be the moderator and host for this session. I'm honored to introduce our speaker, but I'm going to keep it short so that we can actually hear from her. Hailey Jordan, she, her, is a Baltimore-based design strategist and visual artist creating irresistible invitations to necessary work. Her practice centers Black, queer, joy, collective imagination, and the belief that everyone is a designer capable of shaping liberatory futures. And you can see her full bio on the lobby page. And you you are all streaming in. This is the telling your data story. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Hailey.
Solid. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Aside from my general design work, I also serve as the board chair of the Station North Tool Library, and so I'm also happy to represent on that front as well. And so we can dive in. And just curious, Maya, is there an amount of time under the 30 minutes, or am I facilitating through the rest of today?
Um, I like however you want to take, if you want to leave time for questions, and I
Yeah.
can help with that. We have a Q&A feature, or people can put stuff in the chat, and I'll just give you a time check if like it's 5 minutes till and we're still going strong.
Perfect, perfect. Okay,
Okay.
great. So that's me, lovely. So today we're going to be talking about strategies to help translate your impact data into more compelling stories. And as a visual designer, I tend to do that very visually. And we're going to be walking through what it means to create people-centered data stories, choosing effective metrics, and then the bulk of it, which is my primary focus, is on actually crafting that story and using visual tools to do that. So before we get started, I did want to do a pulse check and feel free to share in the chat. What brings you in here today? I want to make sure that I hit anything sort of off the top, if there are any particular questions or focuses that mystify folks about data storytelling. And you're also welcome to come off mute and share. Learn how to tell. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Okay. Going from here's a chart to let me tell you a story. Beautiful. Um, love a data nerd. Amazing. To doing it more effectively so folks have some experience but want to get to that heart of storytelling. Okay, cool. Bringing it to the public. Wow, it's like we're all meant to be in this room today. Amazing. Okay, beautiful. It seems like we're in alignment and there's so many wonderful folks in here. So we're gonna dive in. It seems like what I got going on today, we should be in alignment with what folks are looking for today. So we're doing good. Okay. Um, mm, mm, mm.
I have
Okay,
a
cool. Oh,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, this is a great, interesting topic. I am particularly interested in also, I'm a founder for a startup nonprofit where we are trying to influence behavior change for responsible consumption, people to share, reduce consumption, buy, keep things efficiently, etc.
Hmm.
So we are trying to create programs or work on narrow our focus only on areas where we can measure things and we are able to share what impact we are able to do by sharing it in the most effective manner as much as possible. So I hope to learn today, but are you also going to cover some things where um, the measurement strategies, or is it about storytelling?
It's primarily going to be about storytelling today. There are much more
Okay.
brilliant folks who specialize in the data collection side, but I'll be talking about really that public facing. How do you bring the metrics that you do have to the communities that you're serving and to the folks that need to better understand it? So we'll dive in. we'll revisit questions as we go through, but just want to make sure we were in alignment. The first thing that I wanted to talk through was naming that our impact data is narrative power. The metrics that we choose to record are what we choose to pay attention to, whose labor we are paying attention to, whose labor we're valuing, who is centered in our stories and who is not. And it also has the power to reinforce existing narratives. And when done really, really well, has the ability to show folks what's never been done before. And so the idea is that we are trying new ways of doing things and challenging, the model for the last 50 years by creating, community-powered repair cafes and other ways of practicing the sharing economy, which is different than the existing narrative. And so the metrics that we frame are going to put us in a position to show folks what is possible through our practice. Okay. And there is power to the weight of the stories that we tell. And so in my work, I'm a participatory designer, which means that people are at the center of everything that I create. I wanted to center, though this is the primary focus of today, but I can't help myself. I wanted to center some of the values and considerations anytime that you are sharing data stories and what you should consider when making those people centered. And so this first thing is that it should uphold dignity. Does the story you're telling uphold the dignity of the people involved? And so a simple question is a highly relational work, but a simple question could be, does that person see themselves in the story? Do the different players see how they've shown up? Are they respected? Is their role accurate to the contributions that they've made? And that brings us to this second piece. Our metrics are meant to measure the concerted efforts to driving and delivering the impact that we're seeing. And a lot of the work that we're in doesn't happen in a vacuum. It can't happen in a vacuum. And so we are also responsible for collecting the data, or at least collaborating with the folks who also have that data that give that more holistic story. And so we want to make sure that we're recognizing the many hands, and that begins in that way beginning part of the process of saying, how is my strategic plan or my, theory of change or my goals? How are they being measured through these metrics? And lastly, the metrics that we choose and the story that we tell should catalyze action. So this might happen internally. Does your team read the same metrics and tell the same story, or what's different about those stories? And is that story different from your broader strategy that aligns you to begin with? And then it catalyzes action externally as well. So for your audience, they now have the tools to act because you've shared this story. So they now know, okay, I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to donate, I'm going to show up in XYZ capacity. It should lead to a clear ask. Okay. So we're thinking about the people who inform the data as well as the people who are receiving this data. And so when we get into choosing some of those effective metrics, and again, not my wheelhouse, but I did want to just recognize that we do need to choose those metrics, and that's part of the process, though there are lovely, brilliant people who can tell you more strategically how to position those metrics depending on your funding strategy or whoever you're talking to. But one of the core questions that we want to ask is, how did the work that we did transform the resources that we got to deliver the measurable and valuable outcomes that we saw? And so as I was sort of sorting through different metrics that a place like the tool library, the Station Road Tool Library might be capturing, I started to see, like, we've got our initial efforts. What is it that's in our control? So that's maybe the results and inputs in our operations in-house, what we're putting into the universe to create impact. Then we've got, this more peripheral field of the other people involved. And so those are maybe different sets of metrics. Maybe it's more collaboration on how we're getting those metrics. And then we're looking at, okay, well, how are we measuring the broader impact? And so looking at it from, tying the work that we're doing in our neighborhood, in our city, in our region, in this country, globally, we're tying that back to broader social efforts. And that scale of the metrics is gonna look different. And so it can be helpful to think, okay, I'm in my story. Am I tying the measurable inputs from my efforts to, the scope of who's involved, to how this is peripherally impacting the world? Okay. And the beauty of storytelling is that we can't get bogged down by all of the facts. There's so many facts everywhere. I think people are inundated with facts, and there's not enough stories that are moving folks to action. And so one of the first things that you'll do is narrow down the metrics so that you can tell one cohesive story. So looking at your metrics as building blocks to build that narrative, okay? And so for the sake of today's exercise, we're going to be looking at an example of a repair cafe by the tool library. And so we're going to look at the number of items that are tangibly, repaired. And we're going to look at the number of volunteers and to make that happen. And then how much was saved from the landfill and how much families saved by not having to replace the items that they got repaired at the Fix-It Fair. And so that's beginning to shape the scope of our story, right? And another thing that I like to ask when I'm framing my metrics is, what are the questions of the people who are reading this deliverable? What questions do they actually have? And the questions that a grantor has are going to be very different from the questions that a potential partner has, or whoever you're trying to engage by showing the impact of your work. And so, for example, one of the metrics could be this, we repaired 540 items at this Fix-It Fair. But that underlining question is someone asking, okay, but how tangibly effective is an event like this? Like, are we just all showing up and we're maybe fixing 15 things and it's a whole to-do and it's not really addressing a real need? So we can see like 540 is arguably like a very impressive number. These are made up numbers, by the way, for the example. So the tool library does incredible things. It's in like the 300s, I think, for them, for our last one. But we want to get to the heart of the questions that our audience is going to be asking. And then we get to, we double check and say, hey, this is the metric that best answers that question. And then we get into that middle ground of the headline. How do we communicate that metric? Because a number is just a number. So yes, it's just 67 volunteers, but that they could come from anywhere. But instead, we're saying, our network of volunteers shared their time and repair skills with community. They were active agents. It wasn't like, 3 folks know how to fix things and everybody else is just sort of shuffling paperwork. We can start to offer more qualitative depth to those metrics by understanding the underlying questions that our audience is asking. Okay. Any questions on this first piece? On framing metrics, on people-centered storytelling. Yeah, so estimating that amount of the amount saved from landfill. So what the tool library did was weighed each of the repaired items at the end of the event, and so they had a very concrete number. Yeah. All right. So now we want to get into visualizing our story. And to do that, the first thing that we want to do is not worry about all of the charts and all of the things. We want to get clarity on the story that we're telling, okay? And that story, again, is going to move our audience from understanding to action. And so any good data story and any good story is going to answer these core questions. And as a designer, one thing I'm going to do is ask a question. So this first thing that we need to know, what's the context? What are you actually responding to in the world? What's the need? What was your intervention? What action did you take? Then what were the changes that you were able to measure? Recognizing the more radical that we get, sometimes the less measurable those outcomes are. I am definitely one who values immeasurable outcomes. But depending on who you're talking to, you need to measure it or at least be able to describe it. And then the most important piece of this is getting to the meaning. So why does that change matter? What is the consequence? A lot of this work can bring up insights through practice that no one else is aware of if they're not doing the work. So does anybody even know how much usable items are going to the landfill? Now we know. Now we can share that insight from doing this work. And so looking at our work, not trying to prove that we are the best at doing something, but proving that we have experimented, we have practiced, and learned things about how this system works and what the gaps are. And we are best positioned to communicate what those gaps are by telling you this story. And so some other questions that help anchor why this matters is, maybe that there are some barriers that you wanted to do even more, but you actually didn't have the certain equipment that you need, and that's what you're asking for funding for. So you start to paint what did you learn from being in practice? What are the gaps that still remain, or how do we, go bigger from here? And that lands us in this key ask. So what should happen next? And so that's often funding or, some kind of resources that are brought into your organization. And so I put this into a little Mad Lib for y'all to reference another time, where we just start to sort of make sense of that story. So we addressed this context by doing, these activities to intervene, which resulted in these outcomes. This matters because, and it points to this need for, and then we land that key ask. And so just an example of what this might look like. We get this statement, we addressed waste and limited access to repair skills and tools by hosting community-powered repair events that were led by 67 volunteers, resulted in 540 items repaired, over a ton of waste diverted from landfill, $38,000 saved for community members. And this matters because repair builds the skills people need to maintain what they own, reducing unnecessary waste and financial strain. It points to a need for funding monthly repair clinics and training for new volunteer fixers to serve more neighbors each year. Thank you so much. And so this is just one way that we can start to anchor bringing our metrics into a story format. I use this Mad Lib as a thought tool, not necessarily this is how you tell, this exact story. It's going to have, take on its own shape, but it can be really helpful for you to start seeing how these numbers serve the story that you're trying to tell. And something that I'd like to challenge folks to do is that anytime that you have your first story, okay, this is the value and impact of these metrics, I want you to ask, what would be different if you told the story from a new perspective, right? What if you told this story from the perspective of the person coming to the repair cafe, and they brought this like meaningful item that they thought they had to throw away and were able to get support from this, volunteer, and left with a renewed connection to this artifact. The stories get more rich and dynamic because our organizations are simply served to catalyze and organize people power to meet people needs. So it's not about, oh, our organization is so great because XYZ. It's that we figured out how to the other piece and it's gonna be we figured out the most effective, efficient, sustainable way to leverage our people force to meet the needs of the people in our community. And so it can be a helpful exercise to shift the perspective. So not just someone who's doing the admin or the grant writing for your organization, but from perspectives of other folks in your ecosystem. And so one of the other things that I like to do before even getting into the visualizing, and one of the things I tell my clients is I need this language to be simplified. So putting things in the plainest terms and when you need to provide definitions. A lot of the apologies, I got distracted in the chat. Getting out of our own heads by being on our teams who are in this work constantly. We might say, diverted from landfills left and right, and that sounds really plain to us, but do regular folks know what that means? And some other tools that I like to use when, maybe it's in the simplest terms, but it's still might not be catching. We can use metaphors to describe some of the relationships. And so if there's a relationship of extraction or loss, how can you otherwise see that in a more clear, simplified metaphor? And something I think about a lot is that we use in the work that I do is equating our organizing teams to mycelial networks and thinking about, well, how are we resiliently sharing resources and moving in non-hierarchical ways as a way to demonstrate something really complex is something you can always go back to in a simplified way. And the other thing to note is that when we get to certain units of scale, it becomes literally hard to process. Our brains cannot think to a degree that is beyond like what we're regularly interacting with, and so it can be helpful to convert any metrics into something that's more familiar. An example of this that sits with me is when there's been more language around how every AI prompt that you enter is basically throwing out a bottle of water, which becomes a very visceral, like, oh, if I was just like dumping water, that would feel horrible to most people, I think. And so putting something that's abstract, I'm sure it's at that, large tonnage across the country, across the world, and that would sort of feel overwhelming and like, oh, how could I possibly solve that problem? But by breaking things down into more relatable units, we can then build that connection with the reader. And at the end of the day, share your story with a friend or family member who's not necessarily in this world, and ask like, okay, but did you get it? Like, do you get the point of it? And that is one of our best pulse checks. And so we're going to go from this data story headline of, this is sort of a simplified version of that initial paragraph that we had. We have our core metrics. You're going to see this like a billion times, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. But it basically says, when we introduce this, we get this outcome. This is why we need more funding to do more of it. And so we're going to start making it more visible, okay? The first thing that you want to do is build your visual scaffolding. You want to make sure that you have no more than 7 elements in one container and on your page, whatever the deliverable is. We literally cannot process more than 7 items at a time. And so maybe you have a 20-point plan. That's great. Don't simplify or, dumb down anything. What you would want to do is break that into 4 phases. So when that reader is showing up to this broader project, they're getting context and looking at 4 phases, not 20 individual concepts. And so you want to break down whatever the complexity is of your work, start grouping so that it can be a bit more digestible. And then you're going to start supporting that through your formatting on a more design technical side of things. You want to make sure that all of your headers are the largest and clearest. You're going to be able to look at all of the headers across your page and get a sense of that story. And if you read all of the headers and you've got no sense of what the story is, then maybe you need to revisit how you've grouped your container. And so this might look like, really just having a primary, secondary, and tertiary font size as the simplest form, where we've got our core message is biggest text, then we've got our numbers in the second biggest text, and then our descriptive language is going to be in our smallest text. And so high level, someone's going to be able to read and say, oh, I see what the most important pieces are here. And then as I spend more time with it, I can read the smaller text, is typically how that functions. And then we want to amplify with visual tools like our photos, quotes, icons, charts. With photos, we want to center faces as much as possible. People really appreciate being able to spot clear objects and really clear actions. We know what an interaction is, and it brings us into that world. I've got a couple of links to stock footage that could be helpful, especially if folks who are even earlier in your stage or have limited design support and you don't have photos of all your events or how, of the work that you're doing. So you can get those there as well as on Canva. Highly recommend Canva for folks. All of this is done in Canva. And then quotes are another great way to have a visual anchor that's a bit warmer by bringing in more of that storytelling from participants. And you can use stylized text to make that stand out a little bit different. Your icons are going to be used to represent the concepts really clearly so that folks can scan. You should not have a million icons on your page, otherwise we're scanning. It's going to be inundating to sort of navigate. If you need a good icon, the Noun Project is an incredible resource. And then lastly, we've got our charts that are going to illustrate clear relationships and patterns. And so some examples of the charts are sort of outlined here. the biggest takeaway is that you want to align your charts to the kinds of insights you're trying to help your reader understand. And so before asking like, oh, should this be a pie chart or should I list the items? You really want to know, for one, are you comparing different values? Are you showing change across time, parts of the whole? Or are you trying to illustrate different relationships between two or more dimensions? And so when you anchor in that, then you can sort of pull from this sort of list. Feel free to refer back to this again. But the idea is that you shouldn't have all of these on one page necessarily, but that when it's most necessary, you can pull one of these charts to amplify one of the under 7 messages that are on your page, right? And so thinking about it, not how do you know every single chart, but how do you actually answer the questions that folks have? And so we're going to practice bringing in some of those visual cues. We've got that same statement from before, but now we've got a photo of our volunteer, a photo of, a participant. We've got some icons, we've got a quote, and we're going to pull this together with some additional visual cues that can help us. So we're going to look at color and use color to differentiate our different variables. And one thing I recommend is that, you might use 2 different colors on a graph, but it can be really helpful, whatever colors you use to represent a certain variable or key player that you use throughout the entire report and build that visual story beyond the, one page that you're looking at. You can also use shapes, form to distinguish more abstract players and variables, especially in lieu of photography or trying to talk through systemic challenges and disruption that can be hard to show in, just a photo. And then line style is also a way that you can differentiate and build a legend that operates within your graphs as well as throughout the entire storytelling, deliverable container that you have. And a simple line, as you can see here, can distinguish groups and reaffirm some of the relationships that you're depicting in your data storytelling. And so pulling this together, we're going to bring in and align where the best visuals go with each data point or each metric. And then we're going to apply some color theory so that it's clear how we're talking about each of these different pieces. And then we're going to pull it together into this single cohesive infographic where we are using that visual scaffolding. We're tying this together in one clear sentence. There's not a lot of paragraphs on here for today's example, but you might be navigating those. Thanks, Maya. But we really go from this simple statement to a more dynamic visual deliverable at the end. And so I'm going to pause here. I hope that this is helpful. I'm glad to see that it's been helpful. I'll open it up the floor to questions. And please know my Calendly is linked in this slide deck that I'll share out to folks so you can follow up after today with questions as well. Oh.
This is great. Thank you so much. I think you've done a beautiful and brilliant job of presenting the information. So one of the things that I run into all the time is on printed materials, how to keep things updated. You put all of your statistics and then the following week, they're all outdated. So would you employ maybe charts or graphs rather than hard numbers to tell the story? And how effective could that be? Or is it just like stick on a label that updates everything? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean that it really depends on your internal system to update and how frequently you need to be updating. There are some really cool dashboards like in Airtable and platforms like that where it has live updating. So you're sharing a link to a living database, and then folks can see that change in real time. But that really also then gets into some of your data management on the back end. Yeah,
that's great for like digital information, but for printed stuff, it doesn't, unless you're talking about like a QR code that would take you to that.
Yeah. I think I would need more why does it need to be in just print, or how often are you sending out these?
Oh, for tabling events, for things that live in our
Oh,
space, you want to,
I
for
see.
brochures, like just ways of trying to tell the story, but that the information is updating all the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I honestly think in my practice it's printing smaller batches and updating as you go. But that maybe is like a nonprofit slow
Yeah.
bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll let
I
somebody
just,
else.
yeah, I was going to say amazing. Everyone was loving it. It was so helpful and so much information in there. And PF did have her hand up, but we
Yep.
are out of time. And I was just going to say, you guys can connect with Hailey outside of this session if you go to like the networking, I believe, or even the speakers, and you can private message people from that lobby chat that's on the right-hand side. So please, like, if you want to keep the conversation going, there's definitely ways to do that. But to honor the other sessions that now have started, I think we have to wrap it up. But
Gotcha.
thank you so much, Hailey. That was amazing.
Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
everyone for coming.
Bye, y'all.